Imagine the scene. The world as you know it has been torn apart, replaced by a landscape of chaos and ruin. Autumn, 1916. The Somme is a wasteland, mud, craters, shattered trees. The ground is churned beyond recognition, every inch a reminder of violence. Smoke, gas, and decay fill the air. The noise is relentless. Artillery, machine guns, screams. The very earth seems to tremble with each explosion, and the sky is never clear of the haze of war. For British soldiers, this is daily life, an environment designed to break them. There is no escape from the filth, the cold, or the constant threat of death. Death is constant, lurking in every moment, bullets, shells, gas. Even a moment's rest is haunted by the knowledge that it could be your last. But the real assault is on the mind. The horror strips away resilience, leaving invisible wounds. Fear and exhaustion gnaw at the spirit, eroding hope day by day. Letters home become lifelines, but words can't capture the terror or the loneliness. Each soldier carries private memories of loss and dread, unable to share the true weight of their experience. Men who arrived as confident soldiers become shadows of themselves. Their eyes, once bright with purpose, now reflect only fatigue and sorrow. They watch friends die, endure terror, and face the ordeal of going over the top into gunfire. Each attack is a gamble with fate, and survival brings its own burden of guilt. This isn't a single trauma, it's a grinding daily erosion of sanity. The mind is battered as much as the body, worn down by endless fear and uncertainty. A new kind of casualty emerges, men physically unharmed but mentally shattered. They tremble, stammer, and stare into nothing, lost in memories they cannot escape. The world isn't ready to understand this injury. Newspapers struggle to explain it, and doctors debate its cause, unsure if it's weakness or something far more profound. This is the birth of shell shock, a crisis that forces history to confront the mind's breaking point. The war's legacy is not just physical scars, but a new awareness of psychological trauma. The Somme's devastation is mirrored in the soldiers' fractured minds. The landscape outside becomes a reflection of the turmoil within. The battlefield is not just mud and wire, but the psyche itself. Every step forward is a battle against fear, despair, and the ghosts of the fallen. The scars of this war will last a lifetime. For many, the fight continues long after the guns fall silent, as they struggle to rebuild lives, forever changed by the shattered landscape of the mind. Shell shock swept through the ranks, a silent epidemic. Over 80,000 cases were recorded, but many more went unreported. Stigma and fear kept countless men silent. Symptoms ranged from violent tremors to muteness, blindness, and paralysis, without physical cause. Nightmares, panic, numbness, and rage haunted survivors. Some broke suddenly, others eroded over months. Doctors debated. Was it physical, psychological, or both? For soldiers, it was isolating, a second war fought within. Shell shock was an invisible enemy following them long after the guns fell silent. Artillery defined the First World War and the shell shock epidemic. Barrages lasted days, even weeks, creating a world of endless explosions. The noise was overwhelming, isolating each man in terror. Nowhere was safe. Death could come at any moment. Soldiers became passive victims, powerless and exposed. This helplessness shattered minds as much as bodies. Early theories blamed the physical shock of shells, but the reality was more complex. Artillery was a weapon of psychological destruction. The endless drumfire broke spirits on an unprecedented scale. The battlefield became a crucible for trauma. Military leaders were unprepared for the psychological toll. Shell shock was seen as weakness, not injury. Sufferers were accused of cowardice or malingering. The army feared acknowledging it would undermine discipline. Instead of help, many received punishment, shaming, confinement, even electric shocks. The goal was to force men back to the line, not heal them. Officers believed strong character should overcome fear. Soldiers faced a terrible choice: endure trauma, or risk punishment. The system failed to protect its own from invisible wounds. Private Harry Farr's story is a powerful and heartbreaking example of the tragedy that can result from misunderstanding mental health, especially in times of war. His experience shines a light on the devastating consequences of ignorance and stigma surrounding what was then called shell shock. Farr, like so many young men of his generation, volunteered to serve his country and endured the unimaginable horrors of trench warfare for years. The constant threat of death, deafening explosions, and the loss of friends left deep scars on his mind. After surviving a particularly brutal bombardment, Farr began to suffer from uncontrollable shaking, overwhelming anxiety, and physical collapse. Despite these clear signs of psychological trauma, he was repeatedly ordered back to the front lines, with little understanding or compassion from his superiors. His symptoms, which today would be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, were dismissed as mere nervousness or weakness. The medical knowledge of the time was limited, and the army saw his suffering as a failure of character rather than a wound of war. When Farr finally reached his breaking point and refused to return to the front, he was arrested and charged with cowardice, a crime punishable by death under military law. At his court-martial, Farr was unable to properly defend himself. His mental state was ignored, and no real effort was made to understand the true cause of his actions. The proceedings were swift and unforgiving. He was executed by firing squad, one of over 300 British soldiers who met the same fate, many of whom were likely suffering from the invisible wounds of shell shock, unable to cope with the relentless trauma of war. Farr's fate stands as a stark and sobering reminder of the terrible cost of ignorance and the failure to recognize psychological injuries as real and deserving of care. He was punished not for a lack of bravery, but for an invisible wound, one that countless soldiers carried home, often in silence. Harry Farr's story is a lasting indictment of a system that failed its own men, and a call to remember the human cost of war, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who serve. Soldiers created their own ways to survive mentally. Simple routines, cleaning rifles, sharing food, offered control amid chaos. Camaraderie was vital. Loyalty to comrades kept men going. Bonds forged in suffering provided strength and comfort. Dark humor became a shield against despair. Jokes and slang helped distance them from horror. Laughter was defiance, a way to keep fear at bay. Letters from home were lifelines, reminders of normal life. These small rituals preserved identity and hope. Survival depended as much on the mind as the body. Shell shock changed how we understand trauma. Denial gave way to new treatments, rest, therapy, and recognition. The war's lessons shaped future military psychiatry. Later conflicts saw better, though imperfect, support for mental health. Shell shock evolved into combat fatigue and eventually PTSD. The sight of wounded minds changed public attitudes. The campaign to pardon executed soldiers, like Harry Farr, lasted decades. In 2006, the British government finally granted a posthumous pardon. It was a late admission of injustice and a recognition of invisible wounds. The legacy of shell shock is a call for compassion and understanding. Shell shock forces us to look beyond the numbers and maps of war. It compels us to see the human cost that statistics and strategies can never fully capture. Behind every line drawn on a map, there are stories of young men whose lives were forever changed, not just by bullets and bombs, but by the unseen battles raging within their minds. The courage to endure psychological torment was as great as any battlefield heroism. These soldiers faced nightmares that did not end when the guns fell silent. Their bravery was not only in charging forward, but in surviving the relentless echoes of trauma that haunted them long after the fighting stopped. These men fought two enemies, the foe in front and trauma within. The struggle was constant, and for many the wounds were invisible to those around them. Their pain was often misunderstood, dismissed, or hidden away, making their battle even more isolating. Their suffering teaches us about the limits of the human spirit and the resilience required to endure what cannot be seen. In crowded hospital wards and quiet moments alone, they wrestled with memories and fears that words could barely express. The journey from shame to understanding is ongoing. Early treatments were crude, and society often failed to recognize the legitimacy of their pain. But over time, their stories have helped shape our understanding of trauma and mental health. We must honor not just their bravery, but their pain. Remembrance means acknowledging the full cost of war, including the wounds that cannot be seen or easily healed. The scars of war are often invisible, lasting generations. Families and communities felt the ripple effects as veterans struggled to find peace in a world that could not always understand their suffering. Remembering shell shock is an act of empathy and duty. It reminds us to care for those who return from conflict and to listen to the stories that are hardest to tell. By acknowledging their suffering, we ensure it was not in vain. Their experiences paved the way for greater compassion and better care for those who follow. The mind, too, is a battlefield, and its wounds must never be forgotten. In remembering, we honor their struggle and reaffirm our commitment to understanding the true cost of war.